In this section of the course, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the iPhone's default camera, some of its features, and best practices when shooting. First things first, we can see along the bottom toolbar that you can navigate between your photo section, portrait mode, pano, and then you also have your video, slow-mo, time-lapse features as well. We're obviously going to stick to the photo section. At the very bottom, we have our shutter button, which simply by doing a quick tap, we can take a photo. I'm using an iPhone 12 mini, so I have the 1x zoom available and the 0.5x zoom, which allows me to get an ultra wide angle view. Along the top toolbar, we can see another few set of features. The furthest left icon is our flash icon. By toggling this on and off, we can turn on or off our flash. The tool located to the right of it is our exposure compensation tool, which will bring up a slider at the bottom that allows us to brighten our image by sliding to the right or darken our image by sliding to the left. The HDR icon will allow us to toggle the HDR feature on or off. The HDR feature uses computation to blend different exposures of the same image together in order to capture adequate detail across your highlight, midtones, and shadows. This is especially useful in those bright light conditions or backlit conditions where you have really bright highlights and really dark shadows. I'll generally leave this feature off because sometimes the iPhone's HDR feature can give you some weird, unnatural looking results, but in certain situations, it can certainly help. Toggling this feature on and off right now, you can notice slight difference happening on the right side of the screen where it's brightening that shadow detail, but otherwise it's not too noticeable for this scene. And then the furthest right icon is our live photo feature, which by toggling this on and off is going to toggle on or off our live photo functionality. By tapping the screen, you'll see a little square appear, and this is signifying that your iPhone is exposing and focusing for the area that you just tapped. When I tap this elephant, you can see that it's focused on that area. And then when I tap over here, it's now focused on that shark. If I tap the top right of the screen, it's now exposing for that shadow detail. And if I tap this area that's a little bit brighter, it's now exposing for that brighter area. Again, this isn't too noticeable in this situation because the light is pretty even on this table, but in situations where you have bright highlight and dark shadow, this can become quite important. When you tap your screen, you not only see a square icon, but you also see this little sun that appears next to the square, which by dragging this up or dragging this down, I can affect the exposure of my image. Let's say that I want to take this image underexposed. Once I take a picture, you'll notice that the iPhone goes back to auto exposing your image. Instead, what I can do is tap and hold to enable my AEAF lock. And this is going to lock my focus and my exposure. So this time when I bring my exposure down and I take a picture, the iPhone doesn't reset my exposure and I can continue taking pictures at that exposure without it resetting. If I want to disable my AEAF lock, all I need to do is tap my screen and it's going to expose for that area and get back to its normal behavior, which after you take an image, it'll auto expose again. Something that not a lot of people know about the iPhone's default camera is that if you swipe up at any part of the screen, you reveal a whole set of hidden tools. This can also be accessed by tapping the arrow icon on the top toolbar. Scrolling along this toolbar that's appeared, you can see a whole bunch of tools which we're going to get into. The first tool is the flash tool, which now gives us the option to turn the flash off, on, or in auto mode, which is going to analyze your scene and determine if flash is necessary. I usually keep this off, and only in those certain circumstances where I want flash, I'll turn it to the on mode. I very rarely have it in auto mode. The next tool is our live photo feature, which again now allows us the option to turn it on, turn it off, or put it in that auto mode. I'll usually leave this in auto mode or in the on mode. The next tool that we can see allows us to change the aspect ratio that we're taking a photo in. By default, you'll be taking a photo in the 4:3 aspect ratio. You can change that to a square aspect ratio or a 16:9 aspect ratio. You'll notice as I'm flipping between these that it's really just cropping that 4:3 aspect ratio. Interestingly, if I were to take an image in, let's say, the 16:9 aspect ratio, go into editing, I can then reset this image back to the 4:3 mode by going into the aspect ratio tool and tapping original, hitting done. And now my image is back to that 4:3 aspect ratio. So your iPhone is still capturing all that information outside of the frame. It's just pre-cropping it for you. This can be great for composing when you know that you want your image to be in either a square or 16:9 aspect ratio as your end image. The next tool is our exposure compensation tool, which allows us again to brighten or darken our exposure. This can be great when used in conjunction with the AE/AF lock, dragging it down, and then taking pictures with that exposure locked. The next tool that we see is our timer mode, which by default is going to be off, but you can also set it to a 3-second timer, which will give yourself some time to run into the frame or perhaps steady yourself to take that picture. And then we also have a 10-second mode as well. The next tool is going to allow us to apply a filter or preset to our image before we take it. Again, similarly to the cropping, if I were to take an image and then go into edit, I can then change that again, still back to the original format that the photo was taken in without any preset applied. And then the last tool that we see is our HDR feature, which allows us to turn our HDR off or on. Lastly, instead of just taking a single image by pressing the shutter, we can actually tap and quickly slide over to enable our burst mode. You'll see a number ticking, which is showing us how many pictures that we're taking. When I release, I can then go into the photo app, press select, and drag through all of the images that I just took. By tapping and selecting certain images out of that burst, I can then hit done. I can keep everything, meaning that I save the burst and I export those single frames to individual images, or I can keep only those images that I selected. In this case, I'm gonna keep only those 3 favorites. I don't need all of the other photos that I took. And that's it for our overview of the iPhone's default camera. If you're looking for a more in-depth explanation of the iPhone's camera, then I would highly recommend our iPhone Fundamental course, where we discuss this in greater length along with some of the more foundational lessons of iPhone photography. In the next section, we're going to discuss how to capture pet photos using your iPhone.